So you want to grow your podcast. That is your goal for this year. Well, today we're going to talk through 10 tips to grow your podcast. These are going to be quick, easy, and simple. Let's go ahead and get into it. My name is Alicia Galati. I am the founder of Galati Media, a full-service podcast management agency where we help business owners grow, launch, and maintain lead-generating podcasts. Today's question is, how can I increase my podcast downloads? This is one of the number one questions we get, and it's something that our clients are obviously very focused on. One thing that I talk about quite a lot is the main goals that podcasters have. There are usually 4 goals that we have seen people have as podcasters: conversion, impact, growth, and engagement. So today we're going to be talking about the goal of growth. How can I grow my podcast audience? I want to get more downloads. So here are 10 things that you can do to grow your podcast audience. Number 1, keep podcasting. I know this sounds super easy and super simple and kind of dumb, but I promise you, the more episodes you have, the better and more likely you are to increase your download numbers. Podcast listeners are bingers. They want to listen and listen and listen to more podcasts. And so if you only have a few, there's not a lot there for them to binge. But if someone finds you and they have 100 podcast episodes to dive into, I promise they are going to get into them, especially if it is valuable and informative content. Number 2, refer back to previous episodes. This is something that we encourage our clients to do constantly. How can you build and go deeper with your content instead of wider? So finding ways to refer back to previous episodes where you talk about very similar topics or you're building on a previous topic. This is going to encourage your listeners to go back to those episodes and listen to those, which is a win-win because even if they already listened, you can encourage them to go back and listen again and then increase those download numbers. Number 3, utilize those top podcast marketing strategies. One of the strategies that we are seeing going into 2024 and definitely seeing going into the future is podcast marketing needs to be video-based. Even if you are an audio podcast, which yes, I'm totally for that, I think that your marketing really has to have some type of video base to it. So creating reels, TikToks, stories, shorts, all of that content in order to stop people's scroll and engage with them in really meaningful ways. Also, make sure that you are connecting with ideal listeners outside of just posting about your new episodes. This is something we see podcasters do constantly and not in a great way. And that is they post about their show and then they just ghost on their listeners. They ghost on that platform when really social is meant to be social. So be social, talk to people, connect with people, get to know your listeners on a deeper level. Number 4, be everywhere. Make sure that your podcast is available via different mediums, however you need to, whether that's through a transcript or through video or with captions, or maybe you need to have additional things available for your listeners, but also making sure that you're available on all of the podcast apps. Pro tip here. When someone says that they want to listen to your podcast or you're sharing about your podcast, don't just share your Apple Podcast link. People do this so often and it drives me bananas. I'm not an Apple user. So when people do this, that means I have to go out of my way, and also a majority of the world. So if you want an international podcast, you should be sharing more than just your Apple Podcast link because the majority of the world does not actually have Apple Podcast available to them easily and accessibly. So make sure that you're sharing it in a way that people like to consume their podcast and that you're available on all of these different platforms. Number 5, create high quality content. You want to make sure that the things that you're creating and the conversations that you're having are high quality and they're actually encouraging people to move from the place that they're at right now into a new place. That is where that transformation is what's going to make your content great. but also make sure that you have high quality audio as well. Make sure you get a microphone that works well. Make sure you have video equipment that works well. So that way you are creating an experience for your listeners that feels really good for them. Number 6, be a guest on other people's podcasts. This is the number one way that we have seen people grow their show. We had one client where she doubled her podcast downloads, and then she was on another podcast a year later and tripled her downloads from that. This is a strategy that is tried and true, and quite frankly, allows you to get right in front of your ideal listener so quickly. Number 7, connect and collaborate with high quality guests. And I'm not saying popular guests or the most influential guests. I'm saying connect with high quality people who are going to put your audience first, people who are going to provide value and also share the podcast episode, right? Obviously, that's what we want as podcast hosts. We want our guests to share the episode, to be excited about the time, effort, and potentially money that we put into creating the show. Number 8, optimize your podcast for search. This can be through the title of your podcast. This can be through the title of your episodes, your podcast description, and your show notes. Those are all places that you need to make sure that you are utilizing SEO so that your podcast can be found not only via Google or YouTube or wherever, but also through those podcast listening apps when people are searching for what it is that they're looking for in a podcast. Number 9, make sure you ask your audience to share it. This is something that I have seen people not do either. Some of these strategies people are just not implementing. So ask your audience, ask them to share this episode with a friend who needs it, to share the content if they found value. And that is going to really help you push the content and get it in front of new people. With that in mind, if you enjoy this podcast, I would love it if you shared it with a friend. Number 10, create and use an email list. This is one way where you can take your listeners and really turn them into engaging people, but it also allows you to get those listeners to come back every single time and listen to those new episodes, especially if they're high quality content like we talked about before, and you keep producing. Those are 10 ways to increase your podcast downloads. If you have podcast questions, I would love it if you sent me a DM or left a comment or send me an email and let me know what it is that you are asking yourself about podcasting. Until next time, happy podcasting.